This morning we started looking at the subject, if the foundations be destroyed, from the 11th Psalm in verse 3, realizing that David has stressed our need to place our trust in Jehovah. But even though we place our trust in Jehovah, there are wicked individuals out there who are trying to and will make plans to destroy us. And to accomplish that, they destroy the foundations. If you ever destroy the foundations, then just like if you destroy the foundation of a house or a building, the building's not going to stand. It's going to fall. And so if they can destroy the foundations, they realize that they will destroy whatever it is that they're dealing with. But David reminds them and us that God is the one who is in control. He always has been and He always will be. And God is omnipotent, as well as here he actually talks about His omniscience, His being all-wise, that He knows everything. And because He knows everything, He knows the wicked, and He is going to be just in regards to the wicked, which means punishing them. He also knows the righteous, and He will reward the righteous. In our nation, the foundations truly are being destroyed. And we have a problem with our society because those foundations have been destroyed and broken down to such an extent that it might be irreparable in its nature. This morning we looked at the foundation of the home and how that the home is being destroyed by our society. That God established the home at the very beginning. He sets forth the principles of it, but it is being attacked both without and within. Attacks both ways in our society. And so the foundations of the home are certainly being shaken by what's taking place today. Tonight I want us to look at the foundations of society. And again, realizing that if the foundations are destroyed, what shall the righteous do? The destruction of the home, society itself is being affected and is thus being destroyed. There's the old adage that says, as the home goes, so goes the nation. I'm not sure who's the first one who said that, but it's been repeated and it's been altered a little bit here and there through the years. But it's a very true statement. When you look at the home, the home is going to control the nation. President James A. Garfield made the statement that the sanctity of marriage and the family relation makes the cornerstone of our American society and civilization. Now, he was accurate about that. What he said was true. The sanctity of marriage, which we noted this morning is being destroyed, but that family relationship makes the cornerstone of our American society, but any society. That's going to be true. Now, he was dealing with our American society, our American civilization, but that's true of any nation. You destroy the home, the sanctity of marriage, the family relation, you destroy that and you destroy the society. We realize that because society is made up of people. People are built in homes. Thus, when the home fails, society is going to fail because it's made up of the people that are created or made within the home. There's a quote that I want to read. It's a rather lengthy quote. It was written by Kirby Anderson. And he writes in his book, Our Dance Has Turned to Death. Carl Wilson identifies the common pattern of family decline in ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. Notice how these 7 stages parallel what is happening in our nation today. That's what he is writing, but let me just add here, he is absolutely right. As we read through this in these 7 stages, pay attention to these 7 points, these 7 stages, and compare it with what's happening in our society. He goes on to write that in the first stage, men ceased to lead their families in worship. Spiritual and moral development became secondary. Their view of God became naturalistic, mathematical, and mechanical. In the second stage, men selfishly neglected care of their wives and children to pursue material wealth, political and military power, and cultural development. Material values began to dominate thought, and the man began to exalt his own role as an individual. The third stage involved a change in men's sexual values. Men who were preoccupied with business or war either neglected their wives sexually or became involved with lower class women or with homosexuality. Ultimately, the double standard of morality, or a double standard of morality, developed. The fourth stage affected women. The role of women at home and with children lost value and status. Women were neglected and their roles devalued. Soon they revolted to gain access to material wealth and also freedom for sex outside of marriage. Women also began to minimize having sexual relations to conceive children, and the emphasis became sex for pleasure. Marriage laws were changed to make divorce easy. In the fifth stage, husbands and wives competed against each other for money, home leadership, and the affection of their children. This resulted in hostility and frustration and possible homosexuality in the children. Many marriages ended in separation and divorce. Many children were unwanted, aborted, abandoned, molested, and undisciplined. The more undisciplined children became, the more social pressure there was not to have children. The breakdown of the home produced anarchy. The sixth stage, selfish individualism grew and carried over into society, fragmenting it into smaller and smaller group loyalties. The nation was thus weakened by internal conflict. The decrease in the birth rate produced an older population that had less ability to defend itself and less will to do so, making the nation more vulnerable to its enemies. Finally, unbelief in God became more complete, parental authority diminished, and ethical and moral principles disappeared, affecting the economy and government. Thus, by internal weakness and fragmentation, the societies came apart. There was no way to save them except by a dictator who arose from without or from within, or by barbarians who invaded from without. Now, after reading that, and as I said, pay attention to the aspect of how that parallels our society today. Now, yes, this is talking about the decline of ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. But if we see these stages taking place that destroyed those societies, and we see a parallel with our society, it doesn't take a great deal of common sense to realize that unless there are some changes taking place within our society will end up like ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. It will be destroyed. And if you look at these 7 stages, first one, men cease to be leaders in their families and worship. The second one, men selfishly neglecting care of their wives and children to pursue material wealth or political and military power and cultural development. That third one was the change in men's sexual values. The fourth stage, the role of the woman at home and with children lost value and status. The fifth one, husbands and wives competed against each other for money, home leadership, and the affection of their children. The sixth stage, selfish individualism, grows, carries over into society, fragmenting it into smaller and smaller group loyalties. And then finally, the last stage, seventh one, unbelief in God became more complete, parental authority diminished, ethical and moral principles disappeared, affecting both the economy and government. Now, as I read through those 7 stages, I wonder which one is our nation in at this point in time. You see, our nation's in trouble because it is going down this same path that other societies have gone down and were destroyed by them. We look in our society today and the crime rate, let's face it, it's soared. Crime is just outrageous in our society today, especially in certain areas. You can't help but turn on the television and listen to the news there or the radio or read the newspaper, and you can't help but be impressed with the soaring crime rate and that crime continues to grow. People literally live in fear of being accosted, beaten, raped, robbed, murdered. And one of the evidences of those things is something else that we see. In order to prevent it, people are starting arming themselves. And in reality, that by arming them, our citizen arming itself, that has brought the crime rate down. But we still see those drive-by killings. How many times do we read of those things happening? Killing just to avenge themselves of some supposed wrong that someone did to another individual. Sometimes they just drive by and just start shooting anyone and everyone that's in the area. Robberies are rampant. Stealing at work or on the job, why, they won't miss it. They've got all of that money. They do this, so I don't mind taking this here. I need it anyway, and I can use it at home. And on it goes. Crime is a problem within our society. But then a disrespect of human life. In January of 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court legalized abortion. It was a case of Roe v. Wade. Someone going by the name of Roe sued a Texas legal system represented by Wade, and thus Roe v. Wade. And the majority ruled that she had the right to get an abortion. Texas law would have prevented that. And thus they struck down the Texas laws regarding abortion. Opened up abortion for anyone and everyone nowadays. And these literally helpless human beings who deserve the protection of our laws, deserve to be protected, are now being torn asunder, ripped apart, burned, having needles stuck in the back of their neck with their brains sucked out, all so that women can have their abortion. And all done legally because of that decision by the Supreme Court, January 22nd of 1973. There are still, just within the United States alone, about 1.5 million abortions every year. It varies some, goes up and down, but it stays around that rate. If it gets too low, you have some of the liberals complaining about it. Want more of them. Planned Parenthood among that group, because that's where they get their money. And Planned Parenthood is such a misnomer, it should be Planned Unparenthood, because that's what they do. They destroy the children, and by providing the abortions. What once was a safe place for that child, one of the safest places in the world, still should be that way. But in reality, nowadays, it's become one of the most dangerous places for a person to live. And notice, I called that one in the womb a person, a human being, because that's what they are. There is no difference between that one that is in the womb and that one that is out of the womb. But the abortion has progressed now to infanticide. We have those who are advocating that you can't really call this one that has been born now. We're not talking about one that's still in the womb. We're talking about one who has been born. You cannot even call that one who has been born a human being yet. Some have advocated not till they're 2 years old do they become a human being. Do they do that? Well, infanticide is what it is. So that here's this infant, and we can kill this infant because that infant's not a human being. What goes along with abortion and infanticide will be euthanasia then as well. Because all of this, all of this is very simply a disrespect for human life. That individual who gets a little bit older, just kill him off. He is a burden to society. He's not productive anymore, according to the statements of some. And so just put him out of his misery, put him to death. Or if that individual is in a little bit of pain, go ahead and kill him. It's all right. There's nothing wrong with it. But in reality, it's still murder. And yes, murder is the unjust taking of human life. God will not tolerate such. He expects us to have a respect for human life. Abortion, infanticide, murder, and that's other types of murder that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. Murders, euthanasia, all of that comes as a direct result of not having a respect for human life. But then we mentioned this morning also homosexuality. You look at the societies of Sodom, Gomorrah, and those 5 cities of the plain. God destroyed those cities because of homosexuality. We see this in Genesis, the 19th chapter, and we read about it. Now, homosexuals will come along and say, oh, no, it wasn't because of homosexuality. It was because they were inhospitable. Or it was because of pride and arrogance. And they'll make all of these type of excuses to try to avoid it being the sin of homosexuality. But when we turn over to Jude verse 7, we start seeing what it is. Because Jude writes, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Homosexuality is sinful, and this is God's response to homosexuality. He destroyed the cities. That's a society that has been destroyed because of this sin. Now, yes, it has its effect upon the home. That's what we dealt with this morning. But it has its effect upon society itself. So that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah for this sin. Now, it has been fostered upon us. We just give them their rights to begin with. Then they start saying it's just an alternative lifestyle. Oh, you just don't worry about it. It's just something we want to do. It's an alternative way of living. It's an alternative lifestyle, and you shouldn't be threatened by it or anything else. It's just our way of living. But in reality, that wasn't their intent, just to make it an alternative lifestyle. They wanted then to go a little bit farther, to push the envelope, and they started saying we need civil unions. They wouldn't call it marriages to begin with, because they knew everybody would be opposed to such. And so, well, we need these civil unions so that we can get the rights of a partner in relationship to retirement or medical care and hospitalization. And these type of benefits, we can get them just as those married couples would get them. And if you don't allow those civil unions, then you're violating our rights. Later on then comes the perversion of the marriage relationship itself. Now, sin is always progressive in nature. It doesn't come out full force right at the first. It comes in stages, small steps in order to attain the goal. And the other thing is that they push and push and push and push. And what happens is those who are opposed to it finally they get tired of fighting all the time. And so they slowly start dropping off, and others will accept it, and then they get past what they want. But Sodom, Gomorrah, the cities of the plain were destroyed by God because of the sin of homosexuality. When we look at our society today, how long is God going to tolerate this society and its support of homosexuality? The homosexual community, even though a small community, they like to boast a whole lot more than what they are. They like to boast about 10% of the society is homosexual. No, it's not. They inflate the numbers to make it sound better. At the most it's ever been would be 1 to 1.5% of the society. but yet they have the most powerful lobbying that can be seen in our nation. See if you will ever see a television show that puts a homosexual in a negative light. You won't find that. They will not do it. But on the other hand, see how many times they will put a religious person in a negative light. It happens all the time. Now, what's the difference? It's they will not go against the lobbying of the homosexuals, but they care nothing about religious views. And the religious people are bigoted, hateful, homophobic, if you say anything against it, as opposed to those individuals who are smart, intelligent, loving people who are homosexuals. Now, that's the way in which it's presented to us. And which one would you rather be associated with? You see, they've taught us, they've conditioned us to accept the homosexuality. And anyone who doesn't, you don't want to be associated with that type of individual, that low-class, bigoted person. And thus, homosexuality foisted upon our society. How long will God tolerate it? In the long ago, Paul described the Gentile world. And what we see in the Gentile world and Paul's description of it in Romans, the first chapter, verses 19 through verse 31, to a great extent mirrors our society today. And if you will, just turn over to there and let's read these verses together. And notice all that he deals with in these verses in relationship to our society today. He has, in the preceding verses, talked about the gospel being God's power to save, and how that God's wrath is going to come upon those who do not hold the truth but are unrighteous. And he says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful. I think thankfulness has depreciated within our society today. They weren't thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, professing themselves to be wise. We wouldn't have anyone along that line in our society that does that today, would we? Professing themselves wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and the birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through lust in their own hearts. Lust in their hearts? We wouldn't see that, would we? To dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even the women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error which was meet. That's dealing with homosexuality again. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge. I think that describes today. And look at the school system, if nothing else. Look at our society. They don't like to retain God in their knowledge. Well, they didn't either. Who did not, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Being filled with all, now notice these things, unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. Which one of these descriptions does not fit our society today? Some people talk about the Bible being old and not relevant. This is exactly what's happening in our society today. Our society mirrors a society that was seen at that point in time. But then notice that last verse in this, as he goes through all this, that who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death. Not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So he talks about two classes of people here. Understand that. There's two classes he's dealing with. Those individuals, the first class, who actually do those things. But the second class that he's dealing with are those individuals who have pleasure in those individuals who are in the first class. And he says, both of them deserve death. Now then, our society is not going to do that because it's filled with those very things that deserve it. If our society's not, when is God going to execute that death penalty? Solomon in the long ago said that righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. The people there that he's talking about in that last phrase parallels the nation in this. Righteousness as opposed to sin. And so he's dealing with nations as he's talking about this. A nation that is righteous, and that righteousness is that one who keeps God's commandments. All of God's commandments are righteousness. 119th Psalm in verse 172. Or Romans 1:16 and 17, the gospel of Jesus Christ declares the righteousness of God. Thus, righteousness, when we obey God's commands, when we live according to His principles, righteousness exalts a nation. Look at our nation. Our nation grew stronger and prosperous when we were righteous, when we lived according to the principles that God had set forth within His Word. When people left that righteous living, and I'm not saying that the majority of people were Christians, but even those who were not Christians still lived according to God's principles. When they stopped living according to God's principles, we've started becoming a reproach. I want to end our lesson with a point of history. because historians have given 10 stages of a nation's birth to a nation's downfall. Now, as we go through these 10 stages, I'm not going to elaborate a great deal on them, but as we go through them, consider where we are as a nation today in these 10 steps. The first step starts with bondage, and it grows to spiritual faith. Then from spiritual faith, that produced great courage in people. And so from the spiritual faith to great courage. The great courage caused people to be going to liberty. And liberty would come as a result of that great courage. Then from liberty to abundance. They started growing wealthy, getting more and more things. And so from liberty to abundance. The abundance then went to selfishness. Just thinking of me and what I want, what I desire. Selfishness then led to complacency. Then complacency led to apathy. Don't care any longer. Apathy led to moral decay. No morals any longer. The moral standard was lowered because of the apathy. The moral decay led to dependency. Become dependent upon others. And the last stage was dependency to bondage. Now, as you look at these, where's our nation today? It could not obviously be argued one way or the other as to where we are as a nation in America today. You can't go very far back on this before you get to it. If we're not in that dependency stage, then we're awful close to it. The moral decay has already been seen in our nation, as is evidence that we talked about the divorce rates this morning, the homosexuality that we've talked about, the murder, the crime. The moral decay has already taken place within America. So how long till that period of bondage comes for the United States of America? In the long ago, when God had determined to destroy Sodom, Gomorrah, the cities of Abraham asked, will the God of all the earth do right? Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? If there's 50 righteous souls, will you spare the cities? Yes, I will. For 50 righteous souls. Well, what about 45? Okay, if there's 45 there, we'll spare. Couldn't find the 45. So what about 40? Okay, you can find 40 souls that are righteous. We'll spare the cities. Well, what about 30, 20, 10? Couldn't find it. God was willing, though, to spare the cities because of the righteous. When Paul was arrested and now then on his way to Rome to be tried, they come upon a great storm, Euroclydon. 174 souls in the boat. And God tells Paul that because of his life, because of his righteousness, all 274 souls will be saved through that storm. The Bible teaches that we as Christians are to be a salt, a leavening influence to our society. It teaches us that we are to be light in a world of darkness, like a light that is set upon a hill and men can see from far distances. But what happens when the salt loses its savor? It's good for nothing but to be cast out and be trodden underfoot of men. It may very well be that our nation is being spared because of the few righteous individuals within our nation. But how many of us are remaining that way and staying that way? And are we that light that is drawing people to Christ? As Jesus said there in Matthew the 5th chapter, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Are we being a light to to a world that's in darkness? It's going back into bondage. If not, we need to get out and we need to be the light that reflects the light of God, the attitudes that God would have, living that moral, righteous life. You have to become a Christian first, though, before you can do that. So if you have not obeyed the gospel, we would plead with you to obey it this evening. Upon your faith, repenting of your sins, confessing your faith, and being baptized in water for the forgiveness of your sins. Then, as a Christian, living that type of life where we are that leavening influence within this society, within the world. And if you haven't lived that type of life, then come back into Him this evening. Repent of your sins, as Brother Butch did earlier. And let us pray with you for the forgiveness of them, so that we can live the type of life that God wants us to live. I don't know, and I'm not a prophet, how long our nation is going to last as a nation. But I know that no matter what happens, I know God is in control. And God will punish the wicked, and He'll reward the righteous. Thus, our need to live the righteous life. If you need to come this evening, then why not come as we stand and sing the invitation song?